All right, today we're going to talk about setting up our units within Maya so that they are accurate with what we're trying to make. So we can set up real-world units. First of all, you want to go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and make sure that your settings are actually set up to centimeters. Now, when we do this, we're going to be working in centimeters, but our subdivision levels are going to be in millimeters. So currently, if you go to, so I've already set my preferences to be centimeters, and if you go to Display and Grid in the Options box, you will see that you have to change some of these settings so that it makes sense for what you're doing. Since we're modeling things true to life, and the software that we are using is usually set up in the metric system, we want to make sure that our units that we're using are consistent. So if we move something over 1 unit, we're moving it over 1 millimeter, or 10 units, we're moving it over 1 centimeter, and so on. So right now, I have my grid, my length and width set up to 100 units. Now this is how many units wide from zero, from the origin out, it's going to go. So there are 100 individual, basically 100 millimeters from here to the edge. If I was to change this to 50 and apply those changes, you can notice that the grid from zero, it's 50 this way, 50 this way, 50 in Z, and 50 in negative Z and positive Z. The grid lines are going to be where do I want these yellow grid lines? So if I want them every 5, I could say, and that'd be 5. If I want them every 10, because that is in the metric system, everything is based on 10. And then I want to subdivide that down 10 units. So that would be 10 millimeters to here. This would be 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters, 4 centimeters. So an inch would essentially be about this big. So we're talking about an inch within this space. So if I want to have an object, let's say I'm making, in this particular case, I'm going to be making I made an avocado, and it is, if I'm looking at a ruler, it is approximately 11 centimeters. So 11 centimeters would be from here, not to here. This is 1. This would be not to here. So if I change this to 100, 11 centimeters would be, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way. This would be 10 centimeters. So if I needed to go a little bit more than that, then this would be 11 centimeters to this point. So that avocado would fit within this scale, right up to here, essentially. So when I'm thinking about that, we have our different units here. So if I'm looking at the front and the side, here's the side. So that space, it matters. So if I wanted to rough this out and I made a sphere, I'm just going to block this in. By default, this sphere is going to come in with a certain radius. Now I'm going to snap this to the Z, and over here in my attributes, I have a radius, and that value is going to be 7.5-ish or whatever. So you'll notice that this edge here is going to be 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5. If you go straight down, you'll see that's where the edge is. Well, remember, the radius is only half of the circumference, or the diameter, of the circle. So the diameter is the entire width, but it's only half. So if I wanted my avocado to be 11 or whatever, I had 5.5, times 10, 50.5. If I was to then move that over and edge to edge, we're going to be getting closer. Then I'm going to scale. I could rough in that shape as I grab it, and then I can kind of get an estimate about where this is going to be. Okay, so the radius size and all of that as I make this, kind of rough this in. So this is going to be 100.5. Make it a little bit bigger, so I can estimate the size then of my object based on the true values within my scene. So that would give me some sort of context for the scale of my object. Now there are software packages out there where you can test your model and just make sure. What I do is I call it calibrating. So what I would want to do is go up to my settings and say create a polygonal cube. I'm going to go to my values here. If I was to reset settings, it's going to make it 1 unit by 1 by 1 by 1 by 1. Well, if I went ahead and created this and said apply, it's going to give me, I'm going to frame this in. It's going to give me a 1 unit object, but it's 1 unit. Look how it fits in that size. Well, it's not what I thought. Since I'm in centimeters, I would think, well, 1 unit would be 1 centimeter. Well, it's not. It's 1 millimeter. So I would actually, if I wanted to actually make my unit, if I wanted to make a 1 centimeter cube, I would have to make it 10 individual units. And then I have a centimeter cube. This, then I can export out, go to my export settings, export selection, and turn it into an OBJ. I'm going to name it 1 centimeter cube. I'm going to export like I'm doing right here. 1 meter, it's going to be a 1 centimeter, and I'm going to say export. And then what I can do is I can test this in a software package of some sort that will actually tell me the real units. And one that I use is called Netfabb. And Netfabb is an Autodesk product. It used to be a free product that you could download. But I use this to test out and to look at look at the models that I have made to make sure that their sizes are proper. So I would open this file. I would go to my 1 centimeter cube and I would open it up. And when I do so, it will tell me how many millimeters this thing is. So 10 millimeters is 1 centimeter. So I could make modifications to this. I could scale it up and then export it out as an actual part, as an STL, which I could use in 3D printing and all that sort of stuff. Now, ultimately, right now, all I wanted to know is if my settings were correct. That way I know that my calibration settings, it's calibrated for whatever it is that I'm trying to do. So that helps me know that my units are right and I'm making something correct, the right size. So if I was to take this out and see how big it was, I'm going to say export. I'll call this just another test. Let's just see what it does. Export selection. I'm going to export it as an OBJ. I'm just going to test avocado. And I'm expecting it to be somewhere around 100 and about 111 or so centimeters. So I'm going to just throw that on my desktop to see what I get. I'm going to bring up my Netfabb. I'm going to get rid of this. And I'm going to then open up the test avocado file. Yeah, so I've got, it'll tell me the height, the length, and the width of this object. So here it is. And that tells me that it's right. So this is 10.1 centimeters. I was going for around 10.1. What I want, and this would be 11.7 centimeters. So I'm in the ballpark of what I was thinking, so that file is brought in. Now, sometimes units are not carried over from object or from software package to software package. So I'm going to bring up Mudbox and I'm going to see what it looks like in Mudbox. And sometimes I may have to make changes. So I'm going to just see what I get. I'm going to close this out. I'm going to import that 1 by my 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter cube. See what it looks like. So here is my 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter cube. I'm going to say display. I'm going to show my grid. And so if I go down to my select and I check my units, is just 1. So it doesn't really tell me exactly. See, this says a scale of 1, but if I go in and I use my calipers, and if I click on the edges and drag it across, it'll tell me it's 10, almost, you can tell me it's 10 units, which would be 1 centimeter. I can also create a mesh of a human, and when it comes in, that human should be about, let's see what it says here. All right, I'm going to go to my caliper, and he's supposed to be 180. If I drag that from here, I'm going to drag it here and then go up. So it's saying it should be about 180 centimeters. Okay. And then this is saying it's 10. The distance from edge to edge. So this is saying that this is 10 centimeters. So what I want to do, I'm going to open up or import in the avocado. That'll give me a little bit more of a feel. So I'm going to say import the test avocado file. And that's okay. I'm just going to say keep this mesh because I'm not really going to sculpt it. So these scales are not quite right. The units here are not being accurately displayed. This is saying that the units 98 or so. So it's saying that we knew that these were going to be around 100. So these units aren't necessarily, oops, not to his head. But we knew that this distance was going to be a little bit around 10. Yeah, so we knew that that was the value. So these numbers aren't necessarily adding up. He's supposed to be 6 feet tall. This is much bigger than a centimeter, even though I saved it out in Maya and I tested it out here. The units, this was supposed to be 101 millimeters, which is what I modeled it at. But when I bring it into here, it's 101 centimeters. So these things aren't necessarily calibrated at the moment to work together. And I haven't been able to see, hasn't been too accurate on this particular count. I have used it, when I use 3D printing, I can model in Maya, the units are fine. But when I bring it into Mudbox, things aren't always exactly the same. So if I was to go into the preferences under Mudbox and I can look and see things are screwy, it's saying that the linear units are centimeters. Let's see if we change them to millimeters, what would happen? I'm going to say okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try this again with millimeters and see if that changes anything. So I'm going to delete all of these objects. And I'm going to re-import them. All right, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to say import. I'm going to say my 1 centimeter cube, and I'm going to import it in. Let's see if this changed. See if this changes anything. I'm going to bring back my human and bring him back in. Now, that looks a lot better. And I'm going to bring back my, import my avocado and say open. Yeah, I'm going to say keep this mesh. And now that looks a whole lot better. So those units now make more sense. This looks more like a 1 centimeter object, or 10 millimeters. So it's still 10, but now instead of it reading it in as millimeters or centimeters, it's not 10 centimeters, it is 10 millimeters. And this avocado object, I'm going to grab it and I'm going to move it to look a little bit more. I'm going to scale it up closer to the hand so that I can kind of see it in proportion to the human's body. And so this actually looks like it could be an avocado. And so that is very helpful when we are trying to get things to be in scale. So what I want to do is I'm going to take this file and I'm going to see what happens if I export it out as an object from Mud, and I'm going to test it and see what it looks like. So here's sphere. I'm going to say File, Export Selection. I'm going to say avocado from Mudbox. I'm going to put it on my desktop, and it's going to be an OBJ file. And I'm going to see now if it has distorted. I'm going to see if it has actually distorted the scale when I go back to Netfabb. So this is the old one. That was 101 millimeters. And let's see if I open up this other one. Let's see what happens. This one is still 101. And so I have this one, which is 101 millimeters, and this one, which is 101 millimeters. So they're actually the same size coming out of Mudbox. So really, ultimately, we've got to make sure that when we are modeling, if we're trying to do things for 3D printing or 3D, or just to keep the scales accurate, we need to say preferences. We need to make sure that under the user interface, we have our units set to millimeters instead of centimeters when we're trying to get these things. I had the wrong one open. Properties, geometry. Oops. I want to go to Windows and preferences, and then go into the preferences and change our linear units to millimeters. That's going to help keep things together, keep things accurate from one software package to another.